When my parents died, my sister showed up with a locksmith and told me to be gone by morning. She spent 6 days celebrating everything she was about to inherit. Then the lawyer started reading the will and I watched her face go white. My sister changed the lock 6 days after we buried our parents. I was standing on the porch of the house I'd lived in for 33 years when I heard the deadbolt turn from the inside. A sound I knew. I knew that house the way you know your own breathing, but coming at the wrong time, from the wrong direction, with the wrong meaning entirely. Brenda opened the screen door, holding my mother's coffee mug, the blue one with the chip on the handle that Mom had used every morning for 15 years and never thrown away because she said a chip didn't make a thing useless. Brenda was wearing it like a prop, like she'd already started playing the role. "I need you off the property by morning," she said. Not, "I think it would be best." Not, "We should probably talk about the arrangement." Off the property by morning, the way you tell a contractor the job's done. I looked at her across the threshold of my parents' house, her sunglasses pushed up on her head even though the sun was behind the tree line, her rental sedan still in the driveway, Derek leaning against it with his arms crossed like a man guarding something that wasn't his, and I felt something move through me that wasn't anger. Grief, maybe, but the specific kind that comes when you realize a loss was longer in the making than you knew. "Good night, Brenda," I said. I walked to the barn. "I want to tell you who I am before I tell you what happened, because who I am is the whole reason any of it worked. My name is Cecilia Marie Everett. I'm 51 years old. I have lived on this farm in Shenandoah County, Virginia, for every year of my life, except one semester of community college when I was 19, when I came home because Dad's back went out during harvest and there was no one else. I stayed. That's the short version. The long version is 33 years of 5 a.m. mornings and equipment failures and drought years and the specific arithmetic of agricultural debt, which is a kind of math that will hollow you out if you let it, and I never let it. I ran the farm books for a decade. Every bushel weighed and logged. Every cattle head, every equipment lease, every payment to the agricultural cooperative, every grant application and subsidy filing and insurance claim. I knew this land the way a surgeon knows a body, not just the surface of it, but what ran underneath, what the indicators meant, where the weak points were, and how close we'd come to them in bad years. My parents, Robert and Louise Everett, were not wealthy people in the way that word usually means. They were wealthy in land. 412 acres in the northern valley, apple orchards on the eastern slope, cattle on the flats, a woodlot along the creek that nobody had logged since my grandfather's time. The house was a 1940s farmhouse that Dad had added onto twice. The barn had good bones. The equipment was old but maintained. Brenda left when she was 18. She threw her bags into a boyfriend's truck on a September morning. I was 17. I watched from the kitchen window. And she said she wasn't wasting her life picking apples. She said it to Mom's face. Mom wiped her hands on her apron and went back inside and didn't say a word, which was its own kind of answer. For 20 years, Brenda sent Christmas cards with stock photos of people who looked like the family she'd decided to advertise. She called when she needed money. $500 here, $2,000 there. Once, $8,500 for a legal situation she didn't explain and nobody asked her to. My parents always said yes. They said yes the way people say yes when the alternative is admitting something they can't afford to admit. Then a deer jumped Route 17 on a Tuesday night in October. Dad's truck hit the guardrail at 7:42 p.m. He was gone before the ambulance arrived. Mom held on for 4 hours at Valley Health. I sat beside her bed the whole time, holding her hand, watching the monitor, saying the kinds of things you say when you don't know if someone can still hear you, but you can't risk that they can't. She stopped breathing at 11:58 p.m. I called Brenda from the hospital parking lot at 12:14 a.m. I was sitting in my truck with the engine off and the autumn cold coming through and my hands in my lap. The first thing she said was, "Is there life insurance?" Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I'm on my way." The first thing. 4 words, and every one of them pointing in the same direction. I told her yes. I told her to come when she could. I drove home in the dark. She arrived 3 days later, not alone. She brought Derek Sims, her first ex-husband, the car salesman from Roanoke, a man I had met exactly twice at family events he hadn't been invited to and had shown up to anyway. He got out of the rental sedan squinting at the fields the way men squint at things they're pricing. He looked at the orchards and the barn and the equipment shed, and he looked at all of it the same way, which is to say like it was inventory. Brenda walked straight into the house without knocking. She turned a slow circle in the front room, the room with Mom's quilt on the chair and Dad's reading glasses still on the side table, like she was assessing a vacation rental. By the next morning, she had spread county property records and Virginia inheritance statutes across the kitchen table. Printed pages, highlighted. Derek stood behind her with his arms crossed. "As the eldest surviving child," Brenda said without looking up, "I inherit everything. The house, the land, all of it. That's how intestate succession works." I asked if she'd seen the actual will. She waved her hand. The specific wave of someone who has already decided that information is an obstacle rather than a resource. "I don't need to see it. I know what it says." Then she looked at me directly for the first time since she'd arrived. Let me be clear, Cecilia. You were never really family. You were the help. You ran errands and kept books, and they were grateful for it. But gratitude isn't inheritance. I stood there in my parents' kitchen, the kitchen where I had made coffee every morning for 33 years, where Mom had taught me to can tomatoes, and Dad had taught me double-entry bookkeeping on a yellow legal pad, and I let her say it. Then I walked out. By the time I reached the driveway, I could hear her on the phone with a locksmith. I moved into the barn apartment with 2 suitcases, my laptop, and a USB drive with 10 years of farm records on it. The barn apartment was a single room above the equipment storage, a rust-stained sink, a cot, a window that looked out over the eastern orchard. My grandfather had built it for a farmhand in 1963. I had slept in it twice as a child during summer heat when the farmhouse had no air conditioning, and the barn had a cross breeze. It was colder than I remembered. That first night, I could hear music from the main house. Something with a heavy bass line. Nothing Mom would have played. I lay on the cot in my jacket and I made a list in my head. The way I make lists when I need to think clearly. What I knew, what I didn't know, what I needed to find out. What I knew, my parents had a will. Tom Beckett had drawn it up. Tom had been their attorney for 22 years. His office above the hardware store on Main Street. A man who wore the same style of gray cardigan every time I'd seen him, and whose legal mind was considerably sharper than his wardrobe suggested. I knew there was a will because I had driven my parents to Tom's office 7 years ago, when they'd gone to update their estate plan. I had waited in the truck. I had not asked what was in it because it wasn't my business to ask. What I didn't know, the specifics. What I needed, to talk to Tom before Brenda did. I called him at 7:15 the next morning. He picked up on the second ring, which told me he'd been expecting the call. Cecilia, he said, how are you holding up? I'm in the barn, I said. A pause. The particular pause of a man choosing his words carefully. I think you should come in, he said, before the reading. There are things you should understand going in. Can you tell me now? I think it's better in person. Another pause. Your parents were very deliberate people, Cecilia. I want you to remember that. I told him I'd be there in the morning. That evening, Derek came to the barn. He knocked twice, businesslike, the knock of a man who expects doors to open. And when I opened it, he was holding a tape measure and wearing the particular expression of someone who has already written the outcome in their head and is just here to collect the formality. He asked to measure the second room for the grandkids' bunk beds. No, I said. His expression shifted. The salesman's smile stayed, but something underneath it moved, the way water moves under ice. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a folded check. He held it out. $50,000, he said. Sign a release of any claim to the estate. Clean and simple. I looked at the check. His name on the memo line, not Brenda's. His personal account. That detail registered somewhere and I filed it away. No, I said again. The smile went. What came out from underneath it was smaller and meaner, the thing he actually was. Brenda and I have connections in Richmond. Attorneys who handle contested estates. You want to drag this out, you drag it out. But you'll spend what you don't have fighting for something that was never yours, and you'll lose the barn on top of it. I looked at him steadily. My hands were in my jacket pockets so he couldn't see them. Then, I guess we'll let the will decide, I said. I closed the door. I stood with my back against it in the dark for a moment. Then I went to the cardboard box under the cot. The box I'd packed from my room in the house, books and papers and 33 years of small accumulated things. And I found the envelope at the bottom. Dusty. Sealed. Mom's handwriting on the front in blue ink. Her particular cursive that always slanted right. Cecilia, when you need this. I sat on the cot under the single bare bulb and I opened it. Her handwriting inside. One paragraph, no date. Don't fight her with words. She'll always outtalk you. You know how she is. Let the papers do the talking. Tom has everything arranged. Trust Tom. Trust the plan. We didn't leave things to chance, sweetheart. We left things to you. I read it 3 times. I put it in my shirt pocket. I didn't sleep. Tom's office was above Haywood's Hardware on Main Street. Same location for 22 years. The stairs creaked on the 4th step, always had, and the waiting room had the same 3 chairs and the same watercolor print of the Blue Ridge that had been there every time I'd visited. His assistant, Maureen, who had worked for Tom for 16 years and knew everything that went through that office and never said a word of it to anyone, brought me coffee without asking and squeezed my shoulder once on her way back to the front desk. Tom came out at 9:00 a.m. exactly, gray cardigan, reading glasses on a chain. He shook my hand and held it a moment longer than a handshake requires. Come in, he said. He sat across from me at his desk, the same oak desk with the same stacks of folders, and he folded his hands and he looked at me the way people look at you when they are about to tell you something they want to make sure you're ready to hear. Your parents came to me 7 years ago, he said. Your father's health had been a concern, nothing acute then, but he was 68 and he'd had 1 cardiac event, and he was realistic about things the way farmers tend to be. They had specific intentions for the estate. He paused. They were also specific about Brenda, he said. They loved her. I want you to know that. But they were not blind to what she was, and they'd had 30 years to watch her choices. He picked up a folder. They structured everything with that in mind. He walked me through it. The house in the immediate residential property, 2.4 acres, assessed at $280,000, were bequeathed outright, with a condition: a 5-year continuous residency requirement, meaning the heir had to have lived on the property for 5 of the preceding 7 years to take the bequest without condition. Brenda hasn't set foot here in 20 years? I said. Correct, Tom said, which means the house passes under the contingency clause, which I'll explain at the reading. He opened a second folder, heavier, a different color. 7 years ago, your parents also established an irrevocable trust, he said. Total assets transferred in: the orchards, the cattle operation, the woodlot, the equipment, 5 other parcels they'd acquired over the years, 3 investment accounts, and the farm's operating revenue since the trust's inception. He looked at me over his glasses. Current estimated value, as of last quarter's valuation, $27.5 million. The number sat in the room between us. I heard it. I understood it mathematically. But numbers that large have a delay between landing and meaning. Like lightning and thunder, there's a gap before the sound arrives. The trust has a designated trustee, Tom said. The designation criteria are specific and compounding. Continuous residence on the Everett farm for a minimum of 5 years prior to the grantor's death. Verifiable, documented maintenance of farm financial records. An active membership in the Shenandoah Valley Agricultural Cooperative for at least 3 years. He looked at me. You've been a cooperative member for 11 years, he said. You have 10 years of documented farm records on file with me and with the County Agricultural Extension Office. And you've lived on this property for 33 years. I looked at my hands in my lap. The designated trustee, Tom said, is you. I drove back to the farm in a specific kind of daze that isn't happiness and isn't relief and isn't shock. It's the feeling of a large thing becoming real slowly, like eyes adjusting to light. I did not tell Brenda. I did not tell Derek. I did not tell anyone. I went back to the barn. I sat on the cot. I took out my mother's letter and read it again. We didn't leave things to chance, sweetheart. We left things to you. They had known. They had sat with Tom Beckett 7 years ago, and they had looked at the shape of their family, one daughter who stayed and one who called when she needed money, and they had made a decision that was neither cruel nor sentimental. It was accurate. They had looked at their lives and decided who had actually built them. I want to tell you I slept. I didn't. What I did instead was go through the USB drive. 10 years of farm records. Every ledger, every invoice, every equipment log, every crop yield report, every cooperative meeting minute I'd recorded as secretary for 6 of my 11 years of membership. I organized the files into a folder I labeled Trust Documentation, and I emailed it to Tom at 2:17 a.m. with a subject line that said, "For the reading, everything you need." He replied at 2:41 a.m. Tom Beckett, 67 years old, apparently also not sleeping. Received. See you at 10. That was the whole email. It was enough. At 6 a.m., I heard Brenda's voice through the barn window talking on the phone, loud enough to carry. I caught fragments. Richmond attorney, contest immediately. She has nothing, she's nobody. We move the minute Tom reads it. Derek's rental truck was at the curb by 8 a.m. They had already booked it, the move, before the reading. They were that certain. I made coffee on the barn's single-burner hot plate, and I drank it standing at the window looking at the eastern orchard. The apple trees were bare now, late November, just the gray architecture of branches against a white sky. I had pruned those trees every February for 20 years. I knew the shape of everyone. I put the coffee cup down. I put my mother's letter in my jacket pocket. I drove to town. Brenda arrived in a black dress and sunglasses, which is a choice that tells you something about how she'd imagined the morning. As a performance, a formal occasion, the scene where she collects what she'd decided was already hers. Derek wore a tie that didn't fit the collar. They looked like people who had won before the game started, which is a specific and dangerous look because it makes the person wearing it careless. Tom's conference room held 6 chairs around an oval table. Maureen had set out water glasses. Tom sat at the head. I sat to his left. Brenda and Derek sat across from me, Brenda's sunglasses still on. Derek with his hands flat on the table, a posture he probably thought conveyed authority. Tom opened the first folder. He read the house bequest. $280,000 assessed value, the residential parcel, the structure and improvements. He read the 5-year residency condition in full, including the contingency clause. If the primary beneficiary did not meet the residency requirement, the property would transfer to the secondary beneficiary, who did. Brenda's smile tightened. 5 years. I can make that work. I can establish residency. Tom looked at her over his glasses. The condition is retrospective, Ms. Sims. 5 years prior to your parents' death. It cannot be met going forward. The smile dropped. Then who? She started. That concludes part 1, Tom said. He set the first folder aside and reached into his briefcase. What he produced was noticeably different from the first folder. Heavier, cream-colored, not white, sealed with a notary stamp that had been pressed deeply enough into the paper to leave an impression you could feel with your thumb. He set it on the table. He broke the seal. 7 years ago, he said, your parents established an irrevocable trust under Virginia Code Section 64-2745. I'll read the relevant provisions. He read the total asset value first. $27.5 million. Brenda went very still. Derek's hands came off the table. Tom read the trustee designation criteria. All 3 conditions: residency, financial records, cooperative membership. He read them slowly, the way you read things when you want each word to arrive separately. The room was absolutely quiet. When he finished, he looked up. The designated trustee, he said, is Cecilia Marie Everett. Brenda's sunglasses came off. For a moment, she just looked at me. And in that moment, her face did something I had never seen it do in 51 years of knowing her. It lost its arrangement. The performance of it, the careful management of what she showed and what she kept back. It just fell. Then it came back, but wrong. Rearranged into something harder and louder. She swept her arm across the table. Water glasses went. Papers flew. Her phone skidded off the edge and hit the floor and the screen cracked. I heard it crack. A small, precise sound in all that noise. She was on her feet, her finger pointing at my face across the table. Her voice doing the thing it always did when she didn't get what she wanted, which was rise in pitch until it became something else entirely. You poisoned them. You stayed here and you poisoned them against me. You turned them against their own daughter. You brainwashed them into Brenda. My voice was quiet, quieter than hers by a distance that made the contrast embarrassing. She stopped. I stood up slowly. I looked at my sister, 52 years old, smudged mascara, designer dress twisted where Derek had grabbed her elbow, sunglasses on the floor, everything she'd arranged for this morning in pieces around her. I looked at her the way you look at something you've understood for a long time and have finally stopped pretending otherwise. The hired help kept the books, I said, and the books don't lie. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. Tom's voice came into the silence, even and quiet. If you wish to contest, I should advise you that the success rate for challenges to an irrevocable trust in Virginia courts is approximately 4%. Your parents' estate planning attorney, myself, has been present at every step of this document's creation and can testify to full capacity and absence of undue influence at the time of signing. He paused. I should also mention that I've been the Everett family's attorney for 22 years. I knew Robert and Louise well. I will be a very credible witness. Derek grabbed Brenda's elbow. She didn't shake him off this time. They stood there for a moment, the two of them, the black dress and the borrowed tie, the rental truck still at the curb outside, and I watched them understand in real time that the story they'd told themselves on the drive down from Roanoke was not the story they were in. Then Tom said quietly, to no one in particular, "There is one more item." Tom reached back into his briefcase. He produced a third envelope, smaller than the others, plain white, sealed with a strip of tape. He placed it on the table. Your parents left this with me 4 years ago with instructions that it be opened in the event of a contested reading. He looked at Brenda. I'm going to read it now regardless of your intentions regarding contest, because I believe it's relevant to your decision. Brenda was still standing. Derek had his hand on her arm. Tom opened the envelope. Inside was a single typed page and 2 attached documents. The typed page was a letter from my parents. Tom read it aloud. My parents wrote that they were aware of the loans Brenda had taken from them over 30 years. They had kept a record. The letter itemized each one. The amounts, the dates, the stated purposes. The total came to $214,000 over 32 years. The letter noted that these had been given as gifts at the time, recorded as such, and were not being claimed as estate debts. Tom paused. The 2 attached documents were different. The first was a loan agreement, signed by Brenda, notarized, dated 6 years ago, for $85,000. My parents had lent Brenda and Derek $85,000 for a real estate investment that Derek had described as guaranteed. The agreement included repayment terms, standard interest, a due date. The note had never been repaid. The second document was a letter from Derek to my father, dated 8 months ago, 4 months before the accident. In it, Derek proposed that my parents transfer the farm's eastern orchard parcel, 70 acres, the most productive land on the property, into a limited liability company that he and Brenda would control, in exchange for a management services arrangement. He framed it as estate planning. My father had written 2 words across the bottom of the letter in red pen. Absolutely not. He'd sent a copy to Tom the same day with a note that said, "For the file, in case it's needed later." Dad always kept good records. I learned it from him. Tom set the page down. The room was very quiet. Derek let go of Brenda's arm. It wasn't a gentle release. It was the release of a man who has just recalculated and found that proximity is no longer in his interest. Brenda looked at the loan agreement. She looked at the letter with my father's red handwriting. She looked at Derek. Derek was looking at the table. The unpaid note, Tom said, matter-of-factly, is now an estate asset. As trustee, Cecilia has the authority to pursue collection. With interest, the current amount owed is approximately $91,400. I had not known about the note. I had not known about Derek's letter to my father. My parents had not told me. They didn't need to. They'd left it with Tom. We didn't leave things to chance. Brenda sat back down, slowly, like something structural in her had given way. She sat in the chair in her black dress with her cracked phone on the floor and her sunglasses somewhere behind her, and she looked at the table and she didn't say anything for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, smaller, stripped of the performance. I didn't know he sent that letter, she said. I believed her. That was the worst part. I believed her. I know, I said. She looked at me. Really looked, the way she hadn't since we were young, before she'd decided what I was, and stopped seeing past it. Mom and Dad, she started, loved you, I said. The whole time. That's what's in the will, Brenda. That's what it actually says. She looked away. Derek picked up his tape measure from the chair beside him. He put it in his jacket pocket. He straightened his borrowed tie. And he walked out of Tom Beckett's conference room without saying a word to anyone, down the stairs that creaked on the 4th step, out onto Main Street. The rental truck was gone by the time I drove back to the farm. Epilogue. April. The orchard bloomed in April the way it always does. A week earlier than the almanac predicted, the way it's been trending for 15 years, which is a detail in the farm records going back to 2009, cross-referenced with temperature logs, noted in every annual report I filed with the cooperative. I moved back into the house in January. I painted 2 rooms. I put Dad's reading glasses in the drawer of his side table instead of throwing them away, because I wasn't ready to throw them away, and nobody was making me. Brenda called in February. Not about the money, not about the contest she hadn't filed, and wasn't going to file at 4% odds. She called on a Sunday morning, and she asked how the orchard looked, and I told her it was dormant, but the trees looked healthy, which was true. We talked for 18 minutes. It wasn't easy. It wasn't simple. It was a beginning of something, or the end of something else. I haven't decided which. The $91,400 note is still technically collectible. I've spoken to Tom about it twice. What I decide to do with it is not something I'm ready to say out loud yet. Some things need to sit. The cooperative welcomed me back at the March meeting. I'd missed 2 months after the accident, first time I'd missed a meeting in 11 years, and the chairman, Gordon Hale, who has run that cooperative for 24 years and shakes hands like he means it, stood up when I walked in and said, "Good to have you back, Cecilia," in front of 30 people, and I had to look at the ceiling for a moment to get myself together. The farm is mine now, all of it. 412 acres, the eastern orchard, the cattle, the woodlot along the creek. I walk the property in the mornings the way my father did, the same route, the fence line east, and then along the creek and back up through the orchard. In the mornings when the light comes through the trees at the right angle, it looks the way it looked when I was a child, when this was just home and I didn't know yet what it would cost me to keep it. My grandfather Walt had a saying that I've been thinking about since January. He'd say, "The land keeps the record." He meant it literally. You can read a field's history in its soil, in its drainage patterns, in the way certain crops return and others don't. But he also meant it the other way. The land keeps the record. My name is in it now. That's enough.